You know, I'm just so fascinated by life and by everything.
Mm.
You know, and I'm pretty extreme. So I just turned 60 this year, and up until 2 years ago, I was training with the Olympic judo team until I realized that 40, 35 years is a lot of beating to take on, and so I just do extreme things, but I live that way. So it's yeah, thank you. Uh,
Why
I
do you think
think,
that is?
yeah, so damn good question. It's interesting because I think, I started my program in 2007, and all I work with is extremely suicidal young people. And, we've had about 5,000 people come from all over the world to our program. And fortunately, we haven't lost many. We've lost some, and tragically, but I think, it's that sort of conceptually that, all of us die, but rarely do all of us really live. And by that I mean it's sort of like bring ourselves to the point where our emotional self is like expressed in an experience. That when you do things in a very routine sort of way, life is predictable and life is very enjoyable, and that works for a lot of people. But
Mm.
it's too bland for me in a way. I like feeling emotions. The emotions that drive me are often the emotions that want to kill people, because I think they're just too painful to bear. But I think I was the eldest of eight children, grew up in South Africa, and South Africa, and it was a very difficult time around apartheid at that time. So yeah, I've just lived that way. And I love it, but I can see how living that way is also can be painful, especially if there's been trauma in your life.
I love how you
So
said, like, barely do we live, do a lot of dying, but not much living. Like, that is to be, like, especially in today's day and age. I think we get so focused on, like, so many different things, so many worries, and we don't do that much living, which I think does need to change. 100% it needs to change.
yeah, yeah, no, yeah, very much so. That we have a life, and who knows when it ends, and but and so we've got this design flaw in the human brain, which we call thinking, really, because I mean, it's thinking that really, we shouldn't have had thinking as a tool, maybe, other things. But yeah, of course, it allowed us to do some wonderful things and be very creative. But the problem in this day and age, what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of like, thinking is not used for planning or for creating. Yes, in some situations, but is used for a lot of ruminating. It's not saying, I'm worried I didn't do well in a test. Um, okay, I either did or didn't do well in the test. If I didn't do well in the test, I need to study more. It's I didn't do well in the test. I didn't do well in the test. I didn't do well in the test. What's going to become of me? Like my life is useless, and like, and it spins out of control, and then it sort of lays tracks of worry practice in your mind, which just isn't helpful.
Like
So
this self-defeatist attitude, like, does that come naturally to us, or is it like taught to us?
yeah, I think it really depends. One of the things I was actually speaking to my son the other day, we were hanging out. He's 28, and I said he became a social worker, so he's in my field. But I said, like, what are some of the most brilliant things I ever told you as a father and as a psychiatrist? He says, I don't remember. I really don't remember. But I'll tell you something. I remember how you made me feel.
Yeah.
And um, and and he said that the other thing that he said that I did is I used to have this thing where his school was like about a mile, or half a mile away. And so I could either drive them around a mile or he could run half a mile across a path. And I'd say, okay, I'll race you, I'll drive to school and you run. And you win, you get something. If I win, I get something. And So it was sort of like, first of all, creating adventure of possibility under certain circumstances. Now people say, well, aren't you worried that something bad will happen to him? And okay, I mean, bad things happen. And it's less about this culture, as you're sort of pointing out, of self-defeatism. Let yourself be defeated, okay, and see what happens. But most defeats we can do okay with, and actually most defeats teach us something about what we can do. And I think we're in a culture where we're so cautious about the language that we use.
Mm,
Um, am I going to offend someone with something I say?
yeah.
Uh, that we aren't honest with each other, and that we don't allow for curiosity as much. Maybe I do offend you. Maybe I say the South African Springboks are better rugby players than you guys, and then you say, I find that offensive. My father played, rugby or something. Okay, well, let's have a discussion about it, because if we start off with the idea that we as human beings don't want to make our lives more difficult, that we want to actually connect, start off with the assumption. Yeah, I mean, I could be an asshole, I could be like some terrible person, but let's just start with the assumption that I want to connect, and I might get some things wrong, but tell me about it, rather than immediately having to filter everything I say. Like, am I going to say something today that is going to be hurtful to somebody? I love the people I work with.
Mm,
I don't want to hurt them, and I'm going to hurt them at times. So I think getting back to this, what I'm seeing in is that a lot of young people haven't had the experience of failing and being okay with it.
mm,
And that because parents are so worried that their children aren't going to succeed, they jump in and they dive in very well-intentioned ways. But the child then learns to depend on the parent like a drug.
yeah.
It's sort of, I take weed, I take alcohol, I take parent. It's sort of like parent is my drug. Like, I don't know what to do, mom, dad. And it's okay. You can shape that behavior, but they'll do okay. I mean, most of us do. So
Mm. It's almost like parent safety, parent good, go to parent. They're going to help,
exactly,
so it's not
exactly,
relying on your own strength and your own ability to overcome a certain aspect. It's just my parents going to do it for me. My parents are going to make it happen, which I think is,
exactly.
I understand in some ways why parents would have that attitude, especially around their kids, because it's the kid, right? They don't want the kid to get hurt, but you've got to allow the kid to get hurt and feel the emotions. Otherwise, they're going to rely on other people's emotions and not know how to navigate their own emotions.
That's exactly what happens. And this is, and a lot of the work that I do with people with borderline personality disorder, when you don't have an effective sense of self, and when you don't know how to respond, the natural thing for us is mimicry, is just to look around us and see how are other people responding. But it doesn't come from an intuitive place. And look, if I've got a 3-year-old who's learning how to climb a ladder, yeah, I
Mm,
don't want them, and 50 feet up. Let them do 3 feet up and they fall down and okay, so that you shape behavior, you shape strength. You're there. The other thing is that one of the things my kids did say, they remember me saying, is that I always said, like, okay, a kid comes to you with a problem. They say, Dad, Mom, I'm struggling at school. Now, a parent's natural inclination is to jump in and help out their child. But much better is to listen, first of all, to what the problem is. Then ask them, so what have you tried?
yeah.
And then finally, do you need my help? Because I've got some ideas. But if you don't need my help, don't jump in and help. They don't, it's much, much better that they work it out. But
Mm,
listen with an open heart. And my kids said that it helped them a lot when they were able to say, I'm having a problem, I just need to talk about it. I'm having a problem, I need your help. It's like, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to help? Do you want me to do both? So because we all figure it out, and adolescence is a time of figuring it out. And thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, teens had to do a lot more. and than they do now, and um, different challenges. But I mean, we've robbed them. I think it's actually cruel. We're robbing them of an opportunity to figure stuff out on your own. And imagine the joy that you get when you finally, it's like when I do the Wordle and I finally get it, like, hey, or whatever it is. Um, when you figure something out on your own, you have dominion over the self. You have so much more empowerment, and so let's not rob them of that opportunity because we're so worried that they're going to fail.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that they will. So,
I'm the same age as your son, so I'm 28 at the moment,
wow.
and I grew up like failing and failing well. Like
Yeah.
I grew up, if you fell over, you pick yourself back up and you keep moving forward. Like you're not going to die if you fall off your bike. You get back on the bike and you keep riding the bike. You keep attempting to do things. When was it that you noticed that culture and society started changing? Because in my mind, it hasn't been that long, has it? Like it feels like it's a rather short space of time that culture has just rapidly changed, and we need to wrap the kids up in cotton wool. And you can't say no to a child, you can't do certain things to a child, and then you're just messing up the kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. A couple things. Great question. By the way, you somebody loved you deeply that they allowed you to do that. Who was
Yeah.
that person?
Both my
Who?
parents.
There you go. You see, they loved you enough to let you do that. How
Yeah.
beautiful is that?
My
See,
dad was
that's
sort of like the Spartan kind of mentality.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean that so to love a child that much that you say you could freaking break your leg maybe, and it's okay, we're here, and that you can validate, yourself. Now, people say, well, okay, maybe the worst thing happens. Of course, the worst thing could happen. Tomorrow we might get hit by a meteor. In LA right now, there are these horrific fires. Terrible things can happen and do happen, but most of the time they don't.
Mm.
And there's a transmission that happens, not a verbal transmission, but it's a spiritual, mystical transmission that when you do those things and your parents are there without be careful. By the way, when people say be careful, they don't tell you what to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you like how to be careful. It just says be careful. Like, yeah, I mean, I remember like jumping off rocks and saying, okay, be careful. But like, what did that mean? Did it mean don't jump off a rock, jump off a rock that's only 2 feet tall? Like, what does it mean? So be careful. Like, it's not, it doesn't change. It doesn't say on the other side of that wall, there's a dangerous dog, be careful that you don't jump over they just make this broad statement as if it's sort of teaching you something. So in your parents' case, you what was transmitted to you was that it was okay and that you could do these things. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're very happy with all your behavior all the time, but they but that you were okay. And that comes from a position of love, deep love, deep connection. Okay. So the question then becomes, when does that sort of end? Um, and I mean, obviously I cannot speak for lots of countries because I see in lots of places where this isn't the case, but I've seen this certainly in the United States.
Mm.
There's such a fear that if you don't conform to a certain way of existence that includes getting through high school by a certain age, heading off to college, uh, um, look a certain way, do as many push-ups as some other person can, all of these sort of things that we've set these like bars that we say are universal bars, and that if you don't meet those bars, you're not good enough. You're not worthy enough. And that's independent of whatever capabilities you have. So if you've got like a learning disability, but you're really good at sports, well, maybe you should do sports. But we get this message, in terms of that people who graduate high school make more money than those who don't. People who graduate college make more money than those who don't. People who go to postgrad make more money than those who don't. And we start equating that with success and with happiness and with joy. And it's such a false message. And then it's compounded by, I mean, the drug Ozempic is breaking treasuries in many, many states in the United States because you're too fat. You're
Mm.
too you're too addicted. You've got too much craving. Industries that have created the craving, that have made us eat just so much more than we should. Now we have to create something that's going to sort of counterbalance that. So we're given the message that we're not good enough. And there's marketers who say that if you buy my cream, take my drug, take my weight loss plan, do my exercise plan, you will be a better human being. You'll be a happier, more content human being. And that if you don't get a certain academic degree or something like that, you're probably not going to succeed as much as we're. But by the way, we're going to price education out of your range. So now you're even more worried. And I think it's insidious. I mean, I don't know that there was necessarily a specific moment. I mean, people like to blame social media. Um, you'll transmit this show through social media, and it's okay. Like, and certainly like with everything, there are elements of social media that are pretty toxic. But just saying that, I hear so many therapists say that as if it's going to change anything. It doesn't change anything, simply saying that. I get kids off social media all the time because I point something like very obvious out to them. And they are the ones who get off. But like try to tell, so, we have to get rid of Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and stuff like that. Okay, no, it doesn't change anything. So do I think it's social media? I think it's exacerbated things, that's for sure. Do I think it's that we have planted the virus of fear into people's minds? I mean, COVID was bad. Fear is a much worse virus. Um, uh, and and people live in fear. And so when you live in fear, you lose creative thinking, you lose focus, and then you start doing things that are inconsistent with what's gotten us through thousands of years of evolution and
Mm.
millions of years. So I don't know that there was a specific moment. I also think that when you see certain bad things, for example, let's just say in the media that there's been like a lot of misogyny and misuse of women, no question about it. But then what happens is there's a massive outcry, which there should be. But then every little interaction that might not be the kindest thing gets equated with horrific abusive behavior. And so, you know, maybe somebody does comment, "Hey, you got cute hair today." Well, okay, but now what you're doing is you're objectifying me, and they say and that's equated to terrible things that people have done. And what it's doing also, it's robbing the individual from an opportunity to decide for themselves whether something is offensive or not.
Mm.
You know, and but because big movements with important things to say and critical things to say suddenly became bandwagons for ways of thinking that actually weren't that helpful, that robbed people of critical thinking. So I don't have a specific answer, only just to say that I agree with you. It's been in the last 10 years or so that I've just seen a ramp up in a loss of critical thinking, loss of an increase in fear, loss of teaching autonomy and agency, um, and certainly children feeling pretty lost.
Yeah, I saw it I went to university for a little bit for like a semester to study to become a teacher because I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then they had a critical thinking course as part of the curriculum. So I decided to take that. And I was actually shocked at what they were teaching because it wasn't teaching me how to think. They were teaching me what to think. And there was no aspect of critical thinking. So I saw it was only one sided. If I had an opinion that differed from another student's, and I was actually really shocked that the vast majority in a lecture hall of 700 kids, there'd be like maybe one or two kids that had a different opinion, but the vast majority, say 698, all became unison and went after those two people that didn't have the same viewpoint as the majority, let's say. And I'm just going, that is absurd. That's not critical thinking. You're attacking a person that is probably the critical thinker and has a different viewpoint, and they have to now walk on eggshells because they're more than likely right. And I don't see that as a positive thing in society. And you say that, you know, this is a critical thinking course. You're not actually enabling real critical thinking. And the lecturer just stood there and was going, I don't really care. Like this seems like it's a great debate, but it wasn't really a debate, in my
Of course
opinion.
not. Yeah, of course not. And it's so affect driven, and one of the emotions that is tend to be elicited is um, um, is guilt and shame. I remember I had such an incredible experience so I had a black colleague, and this was during the time when there were a lot of like racial shootings of black murderers. And, I went to her and I said, "Oh, you're not going to believe it. I was driving my car and this police guy, came right after me and turned on the lights and drove for about half a mile and then sped off somewhere else." But I was so nervous. I was so nervous. And she said, as a black person in that situation, I would have worried that I would have gotten shot. And whether it's a real or imagined fear, it was there. And somebody overheard this conversation, and this a person said to me, how can you be so rude? How can you talk to a black person about driving behind, being driven behind a cop and everything like that? And one of the things is actually I spoke to my colleague and I said, "Hey, listen, was that offensive?" And she said, "How would you know what it's like to be me
Mm,
driving?" And she said, I just that those two things aren't equatable. Like you had an experience, you didn't like it. I had an experience, I didn't like it. Of course, you wouldn't have my experience. How could you have my experience? And I said, up until that moment, I hadn't thought, like, I've never thought, like, oh, I'm going to get shot. And that must be a terrible feeling to have. But we had like, an awesome discussion about what it was. But a third person overhearing immediately jumped in and I said, and I was asking my colleague about this, and she said, when people do that, it it's actually very patronizing. It
mm,
treats me as fragile. You were ignorant, Blaise. She said, you were ignorant. Like, of course, how could you not be? You're a white dude, nice car, not a problem. Of course, you wouldn't know but ignorant, not in a judgmental way, ignorant of like my experience. But that person is like in an attempt to protect me is very patronizing because you and I can now not have a discussion. And if you'd listen to that other person, maybe you wouldn't ask me about what it's like to be black anymore.
mm,
And you wouldn't have a sense of that. And so that if we start off with the idea that people are just kind and that, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's like to have a menstrual cycle. I just don't. And, but I mean, that doesn't mean that I judge it or anything else like that, but I can also maybe make some stupid remarks about something like that and be ignorant. Can we start off with the idea that people are fundamentally kind and then ask, but if you're one of two people in a hall of 700 that has a different opinion, okay, and by the way, you might be wrong. And if you're wrong, you're much more likely to change your mind if somebody has a compassionate discussion with you about it. The minute that you're attacked, the more likely you're going to be entrenched in your position. So I agree with you. I mean, I think it's really sad that we aren't having discussions anymore. And by the way, I mean neither right nor left wing. I think that there's some ridiculous right wing ideas and there are some ridiculous left wing ideas. And but we can have a discussion. And also the vast, I mean, I have four kids, two of them very liberal, two of them very conservative. We love the Boston Celtics. There's so much more in common that we have together. We can have a discussion about that. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be at the cost of love.
Yeah.
So,
I totally agree with that. Like my uncle, he's very much liberal. I mean, we can't, during COVID, it was rather interesting because before COVID even happened, we could have a discussion. During COVID, we couldn't have a discussion. After COVID, we definitely can't have a discussion at all. Because if we had a difference of
mm,
opinion with the vaccine or even like stuff that we actually know right now that is coming out, we were saying that during it because it didn't seem right because we're doing the critical thinking and asking questions, even though they tried to make that like you couldn't ask questions. Someone that was liberal was just like, no, I got to follow the science. I got to follow everything that the news is saying. And you couldn't be outside of that. They were totally against us because we weren't at the time vaccinated. They were just like, trust the science, trust everything like that, which made things rather hard because you couldn't have a conversation. They just shut you down completely. And I'm going, that's not the right way to go about it. And again, like I totally agree with you. There's some really out there right ideas and left ideas, although the left, far left ideas seem to be propped up a lot in society today. And now lots of liberal people that I know, they're now the conservative, believe it or not, because of how crazy the left went. And same thing with how crazy the right can get as well. And I'm just like, society is shifting so much.
but Jay, it's also there's a slightly different perspective on that. Say you're rooting for your rugby team and I'm rooting for mine. We can go and have a beer afterwards and say,
Yeah.
you know what, I won. Your team sucks. Whatever it is,
Respect.
respect. But if you have a different, it's interesting. Let's just say that I say to you, I think people should wear masks, and you say to me, I don't think that they should wear masks. Okay. Now, by the way, you're giving me my right to have my opinion, and you have maybe science later on has shown that weren't that helpful actually, but let's just put that aside. You and I have a difference of opinion. You like your team, I like my team. You don't like masks, I do. Okay. Now, in the first situation, we give each other a hug. Your team lost, we go have a beer. In the second situation, I make it about you. I
Mm,
make it personal to you. You don't like this, so you are a bad human being.
mm,
I don't say because you like that other team, you're a bad human being. You and I have a difference of opinion. I don't say you're a bad human being, but because you don't like my political point of view, you're not a good human being. So suddenly I've taken this one idea that you have and made it about all of you. But in this situation, you have a different idea, but I don't make it all about you. It's just a difference of opinion. And I think that one of the things that it doesn't mean I want to hang out with certain people or anything like that, but not to see them as bad human beings. Like, why would you want to die? Why would you want to, you know, kill lots and lots of people? Like, if you if but from a perspective that says, oh, if you don't get vaccinated and all of that, you're going to go around and kill a lot of people. Well, you would have to be a pretty sociopathic person to believe that that was true
yeah.
and then go around in society to do it. But maybe you don't. Maybe you don't feel that the science supports it. And can I just, and by the way, maybe no one's saying don't get vaccinated. I can do whatever it is that I want. I mean, I struggled in similar ways as you did, and I just think that what was a very strong and important difference of opinion, which is fine, became about me as a human being,
Mm.
and it's sad, and the other thing is, but I'm not getting into I told you so, because it's just like I understand it. People are scared,
Yeah.
and when you're scared, you do things that sound right, so it's okay. I can still have love and compassion for people who have different opinions, and then try to maintain my own critical thinking because I think that what happens when you feel threatened, your own critical thinking can go. And so, uh, and then you just become that person without critical thinking on whatever side there is.
It's just like what you said, fear. Fear can make people do some really drastic things they never thought they would actually do in the first place. And especially like COVID, they used fear here in Australia. We had terrible time,
I
and
remember, yeah.
like you couldn't. It's amazing to me because for me it seemed very tribal, just not
Yeah,
just the fear aspect, but the like if you are against the government, you're hated. And
right,
now, after all things have been done away with, people don't trust one another, and there's this lack of respect. So, like you were saying, I don't like your football team. We used to be able to have a conversation afterwards. I could still love you as my brother or as my friend. Now it is so hard to even have a conversation and still be respectful towards one another because the attitude has been like we went through 2 years of just almost like being re-educated almost purely with fear, and people don't know how to deal with that now, so they hide away or they react very differently. It's like
yeah,
protective mechanism almost. I think
yeah.
it's sad in large part.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that any learning, I mean, we know this about the human brain that any fear-based learning is not critical learning. It doesn't teach you anything, and in fact, the way that memory is encoded and information is stored is very much impacted by whatever the strong emotion is. You know, if you get bitten by an angry dog, um, what memory then tells you is that dogs are dangerous.
Yep.
It doesn't, what it, rather than saying that dog in that circumstance is a dangerous dog, most dogs are not dangerous, but because of the fear, because of the rage that it was associated with that learning, then it sort of like it imprints and stores those memories, consolidates those memories in a very fear-based, angry-based way. And then of course somebody's going to be very afraid of dogs. Now what, rather than saying, wait a second, what does this teach me about dogs? Well, like angry, untamed dogs are dangerous, like 99% of dogs aren't, And so I agree with you. I mean, I think that there is a lot of fear-based learning, and I think there's a lot of catastrophe. Every now and then you get like the forest fires. You guys had terrible forest fires in Australia, terrible fires, and yeah, of course things are going to happen. There's no, but by and large we've made it. There is a resilience and ability, and I think if we could just like solve problems together. Like, okay, like this is the problem that we're having. Can we agree that, yeah, okay. So what are your ideas? Oh, these are my ideas. Okay. All right. What about you? Yeah, I've got these ideas. Okay. 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 Maybe try yours, maybe try mine, maybe try a combination of both. But let's just listen and not come down with some sort of like black and white draconian idea that then just alienates me from you when like a day ago we were friends. It's crazy. Yeah.
I totally understand that. And it's like for me, what I've been seeing, uh, nature or society is somewhat healing quite a bit. You just had this drastic 4 year long period, and it seems like a little bit of sanity is coming back into the fold, into the mix. And I love that. And I just hope that it doesn't go too far, too crazy, just like what happened the last 4 years. It went too crazy, too wild, because there is a tendency for that to happen. I feel like it needs to get to the place where we can have a debate, have a discussion, still be respectful, and just focus primarily on proper critical thinking, proper relationships, healing, and just coming together and not having any hate towards one another, which you're starting to see. I guess lots of people hated one particular person, uh, Trump especially. So many people hated him, and like they couldn't really give, as far as I was concerned, great reasons. Like there's no good reason at all to hate anyone, in my opinion. Like hate is a vicious and vile disease.
Vicious, vicious.
It can
I
destroy.
look. I know a lot of people who know him, and I there's a as a person, there's a style of personality that I personally don't like. But I had a very interesting. I bumped into this woman at work, and she's a, a lesbian mother, single, divorced lesbian mother of a black trans child. Okay,
Oh, the
now,
double whammy.
now, okay, so. And I said to her, that must have been really difficult for you that Trump got in. And she says, what are you talking about? Happiest day of my life. And I said, what? Like, what are you talking about? She said, inflation has destroyed my standard of living. And when I would, during the Trump years, I could afford to live. She said, I've been under Democratic presidents and I've been under conservative presidents. People leave me alone.
Mm.
I have a adopted trans kid. I'm a lesbian woman. I'm divorced. People even they're like there's a narrative that I am getting like criticized or whatever. I'm not. Do I think he's an idiot for some of the things he says? Yeah, I do. Was I able to afford my rent, my food? I was shocked. But I think that what we have this ability, and again, this is one place where social media gets, I think, it wrong. You have an incident that happens between two people, which is disgusting. It's a disgusting incident that happens. But then what we do is rather than saying that incident between those two people was disgusting, is can you believe that society is this terrible? And then when you see it through that lens, you say, oh my God, I can't believe that that person did that. Society is just this terrible thing. Most of us are just like, okay, yes, one bad person did like one stupid thing or whatever it is. That's happened throughout time immemorial. The only problem is that now I can rapidly make it go viral as if it's representative, you know, of, like everything in the world. Like, I mean, and often, so we're more racist, we're more anti like all kinds of things, when in fact that isn't the case. I mean, of course it happens. Bad things happen, like no question about it. But when you take a single incident and you repeat it over and over and over again, it tells the story that this is the whole thing that's going on. Where is the video of a person helping his brother, her sister? Where's a person of like, hey, you were in the fires and I gave you a place to stay? Like there's so much of that going on.
Yeah.
But that's not the thing that's going to sell the story. So I just think, I mean, there's that kind of toxicity. There's many Republicans that I think Trump is. I don't know. I mean, I have a very right-wing friend that he was an ex-Marine, and he's my trainer, and he says, like he sometimes enacts Trump getting shot in the ear. And I mean, this guy's being shot in the arm and everything, and he doesn't tell me about any of that kind of stuff. He says, "Oh, oh my God, like he over dramatizes it, and he's got the voice going and all that." So, whatever. I mean, but American politics panders to optics. It's not, oh, these are the 10 normal voters who are actually on my side. These are the 10 celebrities who are supporting me. Like, who
Yeah.
cares? Those
Yeah.
celebrities are never going to have to suffer. They have more money. They can vote whatever they want. They don't suffer. It's the person, like this person I met at work, who's got a trans black child, white woman, single, divorced. For her, it didn't matter who was voting, who supported the other candidate. It mattered that she couldn't afford to eat and that she couldn't afford her rent. That's what mattered. And she remembers what it was like under one administration or the other. But I also think that, to be honest with you, and this is just an opinion, and it's got nothing to do with the book, but I mean, when I look at these politicians on both sides of the aisle, uh, enriching themselves,
Yeah.
and sort of. hanging out, whether it's the military industrial complex, whether it's big pharma, these ways in which big industry enriches itself, whoever you vote for, they're not the ones who are suffering, and I just, I can understand a certain degree of populism. I just wish that they would carry it out. Let banks fail when they have failed. The person who ends up suffering always is the little man on the street. So, um, but yeah,
I'm for the little man. I'm for the working class individual because that's who I am. That's how I was raised. You work hard, you do a job, you sweat, you earn a living that way. And it doesn't mean that you can't be rich or successful later on either at all.
yeah,
Like
of
I've
course,
known
yeah,
so many people that have come from nothing. And when they've gotten to the position of, I guess you could call it like riches and like where all the celebrities are, they're still humble, they're still kind, they're still giving, and they don't act like they're the higher class at all. Like I know people that walk around in like the casualest of clothes, and they're probably the richest people you can, yeah, you
yeah,
probably can meet. And I think that's an attitude thing. I think it's a choice, so to speak. Like all these celebrities that were endorsing one particular candidate, we found out they're being paid to do it. Like you're ruining your set of values and morals, and you're selling yourself
right,
out for what?
yeah,
Essentially,
exactly,
like the
exactly, exactly,
corruption is next level, and the virtue signaling was next level, and the everyday working person was going, I don't care, I can't relate to you, I just want to be
exactly.
able to afford groceries for goodness sake.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Don't independent. And by the way, you keep saying my life is so terrible. It actually isn't.
Yeah,
Stop doing that. Stop doing. And who are the people who are doing it? It's the people who don't worry about it. Sort of, oh, this life must be so terrible. Like, actually, it isn't. My life's okay. You said what isn't okay is that I can't afford groceries. Don't keep saying like, oh my God, that this was so insulting. And it's sort of interesting that when immigrants come into the United States and you say some of these things, they don't care. Like that doesn't it just doesn't bother them because they're so grateful to be here. They're working hard and so and even ones who are disparaged, they're saying, listen, I'm grateful. Like I don't, they don't get caught up in it. And it just it's I mean, I don't know. But I think independent of that, because I can really respect like one of the people on the left who I think is a critical thinker, whether you agree with him politically or not, is Bernie Sanders. I think that at least his way of thinking is critical thinking. You may not agree with his conclusions, but at least there's logic to it. And it's not done with end of the world. It's not like, oh, everything's gonna like, and you can have critical thinkings on and again, and I just like critical thinkers. I mean, I learn from critical thinkers. It's much more likely to change my opinion when I have a critical thinker, either way, than when it's hysteria,
one
you
of the
know.
things I can like agree with you on regarding Bernie Sanders is his stance on healthcare. Like he
Yeah,
trying to reinvigorate the terrible healthcare system in America at the moment.
exactly. Exactly.
He's spot on with that. And yes, I
Yes.
disagree with some of the other things that he said, but same thing with Trump, Biden, everyone else. You,
Oh,
no one's right about everything, right? Like you've got
100%.
to.
Yeah.
That's the point of critical thinking. It's like
Yeah.
what you believe in and why you believe it, and you can back that up with certain facts and evidence, and so be it.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be forced, and we shouldn't be forced to agree with what everyone has said. Like that's the
I,
wrong
I,
mentality.
I am very much with you. I mean, I consider myself a libertarian, and so I think that government needs to be out of my bedroom. I think it needs to be out of my wallet, and I think that one side sometimes says, well, we have to moralize something, like not this or the other, and then it's like very moralistic in this one way or moralistic in the other way, and I just think like let's just get government out. And then, but the one place where I'm like ultra socialist, maybe more socialist than most people that I know of who are centrist in my views, is, my daughter has a chronic condition, and the medication. I mean, I'm a doctor. I can afford
Yeah.
medication, but in order to get that medication, I spend a tremendous amount of money. She didn't choose her. If you choose to grow corn or you choose to catch alligators or whatever it is, okay, that's a choice. She never chose her condition, her healthcare condition. And when I see, I tragic as it was, I can understand the mentality that said that corporate profits, made on saying no to healthcare has enriched, these big insurance companies to the point where people are angry. I mean, you don't support murder, but at the same time, you can understand that kind of critical thinking. And I remember there was one time when I couldn't get what would have been a life-saving medication for my sister, for my daughter, and I mean, I like to think in compassionate ways. But when it came to the threat of that, because it was a day early, or because the copay had changed or something like that, I mean, it brought out a protective element in me that was dark. And so in that place, it's like, be a capitalist. I'm very capitalistic, but when it comes to healthcare, I'm socialist. And the other part that makes no sense to me is that we want an educated uh, population workforce. In Europe, the most expensive colleges are maybe, sort of $10,000. My son and my youngest son who's studying AI, $80,000 this year. And, I mean, I can help with that, to a certain extent with some school loans, but if you want an educated workforce, why are we pricing ordinary people who've got like critical thinking, unless there's 700 others who don't have it, we're not making that affordable. So I think in those two areas, I tend to stand left of center. In most other areas, taxes, government regulations and everything, I'm very right of center. So, I've got a little bit of both. So
Do you think, like, here's an interesting question. Do you think that because what happened to that insurance guy was horrific, do you think that that would actually change like insurance companies and actually doing the right thing instead of being like that guy and being corrupt?
I mean, one thing that happened, I mean, and this happened in my area, was that um, insurance companies decided that they were only going to pay for a certain amount of anesthesia. So you went in. Now, let's just say that you're going to get your tonsils taken out and it's going to take half an hour. Sure, okay. But what if you have a complication?
Yeah.
And now what happens is you don't even know you're under the knife. And then it comes out 2 hours later and they say, by the way, we only paid for half an hour. The rest is out of pocket. And okay, well, that's going to cost you 6 months' salary. I mean, so what happened is the day after that happened, they dropped that mandate. So now, but here's the problem. Here's the problem I see. People are people behave in ways that they do because they're reinforced for that behavior. People change their behavior because something is reinforcing at any sort of human level. They get paid more, they get more gratified in certain ways. Who knows what it is? The problem I see is that when people are making huge profits and making their shareholders themselves and other people, their board, happy, as soon as things begin to die down, they're going to go back to the negative behavior. And that's where I do think that there is a role for government to step in and saying, you know, human healthcare cannot come at the cost, or corporate profits cannot come at the cost of somebody being denied their cancer drugs, you know, or their long-term medications or their treatment. It just cannot. And I think that for those companies, not for any other company, you're a car company, you want to sell it for $20 million, fine. That's the market. people don't choose their healthcare. That's not a chosen thing, you know. And so, yes, will there be some changes? I think there will be. Will they last? I worry that human nature is very greedy, and I think um, we'll go back to certain ways of doing things. And I think until there's a more of an uprising, um, we'll see.
Kind of reminded of Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature, or
Mm,
the power aspect. People crave it. It's just like this thing. They get power, then the greed and the corruption oftentimes follows through. And then because that power dictates, look at me, I've got control now. No one can take this away from me, and I don't want it to be taken away from me. So they'll do whatever they possibly can to make sure that they're protected. And like it's just the ones that end up suffering are the lower class people, the working class
mm,
individuals, which is just really sad. But anyway, I hope that it does change for the better. We'll see what happens. I'm just
mm.
be interested. But I guess shifting gears a little bit, you've got a new book coming out, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, I
Uh,
do. They sent me the cover,
uh,
but this is not the book, but it's they sent me a cover. I wrapped it around another book. Yeah.
that's what I did with my book before I got it. Basically printed off the cover and then put it around another book. But
Awesome.
it's
Yeah.
called I Hate Myself, Overcome Self-Hatred and Realize Why You're Wrong About You, which, I mean, we could spend, I guess, another hour talking about hatred and why people self-loathe, and it's a crazy thing. So are you able to give people a reason why they need to buy the book, or why should they?
Yeah. But actually, I think our conversation is really tied into this concept.
Yeah.
Because if you think of, and I'll tell you why, because people might say, what the hell did any of this have to do with the self-hatred book? But we're touching on something that's very, very important that happens. During moments of fear, we behave in ways that actually tend to be less rational.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is that then you start to believe a story that is not true. And no amount of evidence at the time will shift the idea that that is true. Now, if you're an adult and you're a critical thinker and you're not sitting in Jay's classroom with not 700 teachers where he's the only critical thinker in the classroom, um, you will be able to step back and you'll be able to say, okay, this was rational, this was not rational, and stuff like that. Now, but here's the problem. One of the things that happened was that we've reduced the suicide rate on my unit, taking kids off medication, teaching them about meditation, teaching them about emotion regulation skills, and we've had a lot of success. But nevertheless, there was a small group of people who took their lives. And when I went back and looked at their records, it's because even though uh, let's just say you hate yourself and you say, well, I'm going to learn how to ride a bicycle. Well, now you learn how to ride a bicycle, but you still hate yourself. So even though I taught them these skills, there was a small group of people who tragically took their lives. And that is because they had a core sense of self-hatred. That is that, and that felt immutable. I mean, you clearly you identify as male. If I say, hey, Jay, I was at your place and I took your DNA, dude, you're XX. There's no way I would convince you that you're that you're female. You're that certain. In the same way that these people who have core self-hatred absolutely hate themselves. And often what happens is that if there's been misuse as children, if there's been a lot of criticism that gives the message, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, everybody needs vaccines, everybody needs vaccines, everybody, whatever that message is. One thing is as an adult, the other thing is as a child. So when there's sexual abuse, physical abuse, and there's no uplifting of that child, you come to the conclusion that you are faulty, that you are not worth it. And what I'm seeing is a lot of that here in the United States, but it's paired with, I mean, related concepts, perfectionism. If everything isn't perfect, then I'm not good enough, self-disgust, self-criticism, you know, I'm going to screw up and then my life is going to be a disaster. And so, because, and especially for very young children, when that idea is implanted in the brain, it's like you speak English because as a young child, you were brought up with an English speaking family. If I grabbed you and put you in China, you'd be speaking Mandarin or Cantonese or whatever it is, because that's how you would have learned. So for a lot of kids who then look at themselves in this very critical way, it's very painful to just see yourself in this way, to have this narrative in your head that tells you that it is true. And that then what happens is when you have that narrative, you start making choices that support that narrative. So I've been mistreated. I'm not worthy. Now I'm of dating age. That guy seems like a nice guy. This guy is cruel. He's harsh, beats me up, is very abusive. I deserve that. I deserve that. And it reinforces my narrative of the self. So I think that so why do people need this book? Because yes, I am targeting core self-hatred, and especially as a precursor to deep emotional suffering and potentially suicide. But at a different level, it's any form of enduring self-criticism that says, I am not good enough. And by the way, there's so many things that I do. Like if I ran the 100 meters against Usain Bolt, play tennis against Federer, or like whatever it is, I'm just not good enough. I just am not. And okay. But it's when it becomes a narrative about my identity as a human being, and many people struggle with some version of self-criticism to the point of self-hatred. And no amount of medication, no amount of therapy typically reduces that.
When we say self-hatred, when it comes down to identity, especially with children being confused, oftentimes, like today, I've seen a lot of people saying a child is confused about their biological sex, for example, and they're told you can be something else. And they try and quote trans that child, even though that child may actually hate their original identity. Should we, for example, like what they're doing now, lie to that child and say, I want to help you, but in doing that, you're also lying to the child and not actually really helping them wholeheartedly. In fact, you're making it worse, and you could end up with that child potentially taking their own life later on.
And actually, and something like that is something that we see. Look, childhood and adolescence is a time of great exploration at
Mm.
so many different levels. And, when we let natural processes take their place, most of the time, things just work out. And, you know, um, I don't doubt, I have no doubt that people struggle in many different ways. But I have a problem, and that is if somebody says, I don't identify in this way, and I then jump on and say, you know what, you're super right. This is the way. I'm going to help you with doing things differently. Um, Again, it's getting back to this idea. We're robbing them of an opportunity to figure things out on themselves, and we're also robbing them of nature and biology doing what nature and biology does, which is to um, uh, allow a human being to develop as they need to develop. And so when we introduce critical thinking ideas or ideas that are um, uh, beyond the comprehension of a young mind, and then we encourage them to think in one way or another. The problem is that those ideas get entrenched, and they can get stuck, and they can lead to a lot of self-hatred, self-doubt, and those kinds of things. I'm not saying don't think, if a child is struggling with something, just sit there and talk about it with them. That it'll work out. But I think that we jump in so quickly. It's like, no, you're thinking this way. Okay, I'm going to force you in this one direction or another, which is actually inconsistent with the human brain. We think that we're doing a kindness when we're not. So, you know, I wish that we would slow processes down in the sense of saying, you know, um, be able to have discussions, be able to have back to this point of critical thinking, be able to challenge narrative that is just not true. So when the child, let's just say the child's been abused and it comes up with a conclusion about itself, is to be able to point out that is actually understandable that a child would feel that way given the circumstances that it was raised in, but it doesn't have to be true that it is a person worthy of suffering, worthy of scorn, and that they can learn to see themselves in a slightly different light. But we do that through careful listening, through careful compassion. We don't do it by becoming overly reactive and going the other way, which I think is, a lot of the things. I see a lot of reactivity in parenting, in politics, in all sorts of things. And that reactivity just doesn't help because we create more problems, as you pointed out, by swinging rapidly the other way. It just doesn't help. So yeah, and I mean, I think that that's it's a fair statement.
Mm. There's there's loads more questions I actually had for you, especially in this regard.
Yeah, yeah, no, I
But
know, I
I
know.
know it's probably late for you, my friend.
Yeah.
Where can people get a copy of the book? Just finishing this up.
Sure. I mean, I think it's going to be in all the major, booksellers here in the United States, Amazon, Barnes and Noble and stuff like that. So, whatever the bookseller is coming out in a couple of weeks. And my hope really more than anything else is just for everybody, independent of who you think you are and everything. If there's any kind of that kind of self-criticism is to let the voices of the haters dissolve into the neither and to see yourself as a beautiful human being that you don't have to be defined by any standard or norm, that you've been taught terrible lessons by people who don't know how to teach because they've taken critical thinking away, that you can love yourself and that whether it's intense self-hatred or self-criticism or self whatever, I have very specific techniques that don't cover standard psychotherapy or medications as a way of getting to the other side. And in fact, through a lot of critical thinking exercises.
Well, I love your message. I think it's important. And thank you for sharing today. I've enjoyed our conversation and you're welcome back anytime, my friend. You
Thank you, thank you. You do an incredible job, and it's nice to hear critical thinkers. We may not agree on everything, but you know what? We'll go and have a beer afterwards.
amen about
Arm in
that.
arm.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
with you. I'm with you there, my friend. So thank you so much for joining me
Yeah.
today on the Storybox podcast.
All right. Awesome. Thanks a lot, and good luck with this show.